كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum. Hope you guys are very, very well. So we are continuing with our discussion on ushr and kharaj. We already covered some aspects of it in today's lesson, lesson number 14. Inshallah, we'll be covering the discussion regarding reviving dead lands or barren lands. We've spoken about Imam Abu Yusuf's opinion. We'll be dealing with Imam Muhammad's opinion of how he tells us that we should do this. The next session then is, the next point we're going to cover is regarding what is the kharaj amount on different types of produce essentially. Ushr is very clear, that's 1/10 or 1/5, just depending on what the watering system is. But when it comes to the kharaj, what exactly, how much is that, right? Because in the name doesn't tell you how much it is. So we're going to deal with what Umar radiallahu anhu legislated for different types of produce, different types of lands, and so on. So we'll deal with that in a bit of detail. And then after that, it will be the discussion about if in those lands they weren't able to produce anything because of some calamity, some kind of pestilence, or some kind of disease that swept through it, or some other problem that you can say disturbed the yield, then what happens after that, right? Do they still have to pay or not? So we'll discuss all of these points. So let's begin. As we were discussing Imam Muhammad's view, and Imam Muhammad's view, rahimahullah, was that if it was watered using natural water from the heavens, from the sky, rainwater, there was enough rain there, or through the major, or through a well, right, that somebody bored down a well, or somebody diverted something from one of the major rivers down there, the river Tigris, Euphrates, or the Sayhun and the Jayhun, Amu Darya, Sir Darya, then in all of these cases, that land he will treat as a ushri land, right? So it'll be the tithe that we'll have to give. And if it's not that way, but the person managed to revive it using water from a lake that they dug up themselves, they created the whole lake, right, themselves, right? Actually, not themselves. It was a lake that is not one of those main lakes, but it was their lakes that the non-Arabs have dug up in other times, and so that is going to have another discussion. So inshallah we'll be looking at that today. So what Imam Quduri says, وَإِنْ أَحْيَأَهَا بِمَاءِ الْأَنْهَارِ الَّتِي احْتَفَرَهَا الْأَعَاجِمِ. If it's being irrigated by lakes that were dug up and formed by the non-Arabs, and then he's got the names of them. So these are lakes that actually exist, right? مثل نهر الملك كسرى أنوشيروان. So like, for example, the lake of the king, or the Khosrows, called Anushirwan, right? This is a lake that's on the path of Kufa to Baghdad. That's where that lake is. And it draws its water, originally this lake draws its water from the Euphrates, right? Then they've got some others that they've mentioned, or the lake of Yazdajird, right? Again, that's one of the Persian leaders of the time. So if it is from these additional lakes, then it's a kharaji land. So it's interesting. He goes by the irrigation method. If they come from those original lakes, the Euphrates and the Tigris that were there from before, that were not dug up by, or that were not formulated or formed by these non-Arab, kings, then those are ushri. Otherwise, if it's formulated by these kings, then it is considered to be a kharaji land instead, right? Now, in the Tashih, which is the preponderating book, right, that tells us whose view to take, says that Imam Mahbubi and Nasafi and Sadr Sharia have gone with Imam Abu Yusuf's view in this regard. Imam Abu Hanifa didn't have a view on this, it seems. Right, now how much? This is the main part. How much is the kharaj? What do they charge? How much do they charge? So والخراج الذي وضعه أمير المؤمنين عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه على أهل السواد. So the kharaj, or the tax that the leader of the faithful Umar ibn al-Khattab had imposed on the people of those fertile lands of Iraq is from every jarib. So from every jarib, I'll explain to you what a jarib is, that water could reach, meaning any jarib that could be irrigated and that was capable of being farmed and cultivated. A Qafiz Hashimi, a Hashmi Qafiz measure of produce would have to be paid. So a Qafiz measure would have to be paid, and there's multiple types of Qafiz measures. So this is the Qafiz Hashimi. That much will have to be paid, and that has to be paid from every jarib. Jarib is the area of land. So what is exactly a jarib? I'll tell you that. It's a piece of land which is 60 cubits in length and 60 cubits in width. So it's 60 by 60 cubits. Now that's a dhira in Arabic. A cubit is essentially from the elbow to the fingers. It's usually about 48 to 50 centimeters is 1 cubit. So you can say half a meter, just to kind of get a rough idea. So if it's 60 by 60, that means it's approximately 29 to 30 meters square. So from every 29 or 30 meters square, you're going to have to pay 1 Hashmi Qafiz of whatever is the produce that's cultivated there. So if it's apples, it's going to be apples. If it's whatever it is, that's what he's saying. And as long as yablughu al-ma, as long as water can get there, because without water you can't grow anything. So it has to be a land that water reaches, and also وَيَصْلُحُ لِلزِّرَاعَةِ, it is suitable for cultivation. So a Qafiz Hashmi amount, right? A Qafiz is a measure of whatever is produced in there, whether it's wheat or barley or whatever, or dates or whatever it is. This is as mentioned in the Sharh al-Tahawi. Imam Zahiruddin says, for example, he clarifies that if there's a wheat or barley or whatever, so you'll have to give Qafiz of that amount. Now, then he goes in, and again, this is probably not very relevant to us, so I'm not going to mention and explain how much all of this is, but I'll give you some idea based on what the Muhaqqiq Baqdash has said. Qafiz al-Hashmi first, Imam Maydani says the Qafiz Hashmi, in line with Quduri, he says is essentially the amount of a Qafiz Hashimi. This is a volumetric measure, by the way, it's not weight. So a Qafiz that they have to give of whatever the produce is, a Hashmi Qafiz is equivalent to 1 sa, one prophet's sa. So the sa of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and a dirham, and additionally a dirham. So it's that slight more than a sa. And yeah, so wadirhamin, so that is how much the volume, so that's how much volumetrically you'll have to measure of the wheat, and then you'll give that. So it's a volume and it's in liters. Now how much is a sa'un nabawi? According to the Hanafis, is approximately 4.127 liters. 4.127 liters is a sa' nabawi, right? This is based on the research of Dr. Muhammad al-Kharoof, right? So that means it's going to be just a bit over that. So he's going to وَهُوَ الصَّاءُ وَدِرْهَمٌ. So a Qafiz Hashimi is a sa', and then you have to give a dirham along with that, right? A sa' of the produce along with the dirham. That is what it is. Okay, that is from any kind of produce where the water reaches and the land is suitable for cultivation, right? وَمِنْ جَرِيبِ الرَّطَبَةِ here al-barsim وَمِثْلُهَا الْبُقُولِ خَمْسَةُ دَرَاهِمْ. So this is the next amount. If it's fodder crops, right, crops for fodder, right, then in that it's different. For example, alfalfa, or I think you call it alfalfa, right, or alfalfa, right, and similar to that other vegetables, then for that you have to give 5 dirhams instead. So it won't be the sa' dirham, it'll be 5 dirhams, right? And وَمِنْ جَرِيمِ الْكَرْمِ, and if it's vineyards that you're talking about, right, which means shajarul inab, which means any grapes, the trees that provide grapes, and similar others, al-muttasil, that are very close together and contiguous, one after the other, they're grown, so there's not much land to cultivate anything else underneath it, right? So the whole land is occupied with the vineyard, or so this is talking about grapes or dates, palm trees. So if it's so close, palm trees, then in both of those cases, it's going to be 10 dirhams instead. So this is vineyards that are very, very close, planted close, very together, and likewise date palms that are planted very close together. In there is going to be 10 dirhams that they're going to have to provide from every jarib, which means every 60 cubit square. So if you have 10 lots of them, then it's going to be that times the 10 dirhams. This is what has been transmitted from Umar radiallahu anhu, because he sent Uthman ibn Hanif radiallahu anhu so that he could survey the land of the entire Iraqi fertile area. And then what he did was that he put Hudhayfa radiallahu anhu as the supervisor of that, and that whole land apparently came to 36 million jaribs. 36 million jaribs, and then it was divided up by whoever owned each section. So that's when he stipulated all of these amounts and imposed them. This was done in the presence of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum at the time. So that essentially makes it a consensus of the Sahaba, because nobody had an issue with it, they all agree with it, nobody had an objection to it. The other reason why they make it different, and it's not just one fixed amount for anything you do in there, it's different amounts. It's because he said, Imam Maydari says, لأن المؤون متفاوتة والكرم أخفها مؤنة والمزارع أكثر مؤنة. So it depends on the amount of work is needed for each of these types of crops. So what he's saying is that there's a difference in taxation is due to the varying costs of cultivation. And out of all of them, the vineyards are the lowest in the cost. They don't require much care. They don't require much effort, right? Whereas the mazari, which means the agricultural fields, the agricultural lands, they're the highest, they require the highest burden, the highest cost, because they have to do a lot more in there. Whereas وَالرِّطَابَ بَيْنَهُمَا, and the fodder lands that we discussed earlier, those are in between the two. So that's why the responsibility and the obligation is going to change based on that. So that's why, because the grapes were the least in terms of cost of looking after them, had the lowest cost. That's why it's 10 dirhams in there, which is the highest of the highest tax, and because there's the most cost is in the agricultural lands to grow things in, right? That has the most, so that's why the tax of that is the least, which is just sa and a dirham, okay? And in the intermediate one, it's the middle taxation, right, which was the 5 dirhams. So it's either 10 dirhams, 5 dirhams, or a sa and a dirham, as was discussed earlier. Now, the reason we said above that as long as they're contiguous and they're all planted very close together, because if they were planted disparately and separately, they were scattered, and in between or intermediately in between them there was cultivation fields, then no tax is to be imposed on that. No tax is to be imposed in that, right? Likewise, لو غرس أشجار غير مثمرة, likewise if anybody has planted into that non-fruit bearing trees, so there's no produce, it's just trees, you just left it as trees, so they have to essentially what the point is that they have to produce something for the kharaj to be on there. They have to produce something for the kharaj on there, and that's why he says that they have to be producible in that sense. So if there are trees in there that don't bear any fruit, then there's no kharaj on there. So nothing imposed, right? وَمَا سِوَى ذَلِكَ مِنْ بَقِيَّةِ الْأَصْنَافِ. So we discussed the grapes, the vineyards, and the palm trees, and the alfalfa, and all of these other things. Anything beyond that, anything beyond that, مما ليس فيه توظيف الإمام, or which Umar radiallahu anhu did not legislate, because those were the things that were prevalent in his time. That's why he legislated those. But whatever was not, then we have a says that anything beyond that which Umar radiallahu anhu did not impose anything on, like orchards, bustan, right? The bustan is an orchard, and he says basically a bustan, an orchard, is essentially anything which is a private orchard which they put walls around. So it's anything that is surrounded by walls and there's scattered trees in there, which it's possible to, so there's scattered trees. There are trees in there, but they're all scattered, and it's possible to do some kind of crops and cultivation in between. So then he says, فَلَوْ مُلْتَفَّةً أي مُتَّصِلَةً لَا يُمْكِنُ زِرَاعَةَ أَرْضِهَا فَهُوَ كَرْمٌ. So in an orchard, which is usually going to be a date or a vineyard, he's saying that if it's all scattered around, so you can't really do much cultivation in there, then there's probably going to be no kharaj in there. However, if you can do cultivation, even if it's got some trees that are scattered around, but you can cultivate in there, then in that case, it's going to be just treated as a vineyard. Meaning, if it's so, if you can't do any cultivation in them, if you can't do any cultivation in there, and the grape, the orchard is such that it has the trees that are not grapes or dates, right? That are not. So let me start again. If there's no grapes or dates, it's something else that has not been legislated by Umar radiallahu an, and they're scattered, then and you can do something in there, then there's nothing on that. However, if these trees that bear something are so close together, they're dense and contiguous, and you can't do anything underneath it, and it's just them, then it's going to be treated like a vineyard. يُوضَعُ عَلَيْهَا بِحِسَابِ الطَّاقَةِ. However, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same tax on them. The emir, the leader, the agricultural minister, whoever it is at the time, he can put on there whatever he thinks is according to the capability. They will determine the capability of that land. فَتَعْتَبِرُهَا فِي مَا لَا تَوْظِيفَ فِيهِ وَغَايَةُ الطَّاقَةِ نِصْفُ الْخَارِجِ. Interestingly, the max you can impose on any of this is half of the produce. That's the max you can impose on this, is half of the produce. The maximum capacity that you could impose is half the produce, because half the produce would be most equitable in that regard. So you can't go beyond that. Even if it has the ability to do more than that, you can't do that. However, وَتَمَامُهُ فِي الْكَافِي, and then he says فَإِن لَمْ تُطِقْ مَا وُضِعَ عَلَيْهَا. If there is a case in which they impose something because of the potential of that land, but then they discover that even after trying their best, that they can't produce that much, right? And what they produce does not even reach double of the kharaj that's imposed on them. So for example, if they have to give 10 dirhams and they're only producing less than 20 dirhams worth, نَقَصَهُمُ الْإِمَامِ, the imam will reduce their amount. So it can never go beyond half. So it's going to be less than that, obviously. And that he's going to be obligated to go down, right? Obligated to reduce it to the amount that they can do. And as I said, it's not appropriate to go beyond half, and they should definitely not go beyond 1/5 either. So they should at least make them pay 1/5, as is the dur from the hidayah. There are other cases where the kharaj actually drops. So that's the next section that he's going to be dealing, where you don't have to pay any kharaj anymore. Even though if something imposed on you, you can actually say, yeah. وَإِنْ غَلَبَ الْمَاءُ عَلَى أَرْضِ الْخَرَاجِ حَتَّى مَنَعَ زِرَاعَتِهَا. For example, if the land became flooded in a way that you were no longer able to cultivate it, or the water source that you had for irrigation was severed, it's cut off, you can't get water, and there's a drought. أو اصطلم استأصل الزرع آفة سماوية لا يمكن الاحتراز عنها كغرق وحرق وشدة برد فلا خراج عليهم. Or if it's affected by some kind of major catastrophe, whether natural catastrophe, for example, right? Or if it's not natural catastrophe, it's something that was just impossible. There was a major fire, major wildfires or something like that. Or again, it all became submerged in water, or extreme cold killed everything off. So this is when the crops are completely destroyed. They're completely destroyed. Then there's no kharaj on these people, because they just don't have the capability to produce anything. And to be honest, the reason, the illah, the cause for this tax has to be the estimated potential yield. And there is no yield here, right? There's no yield here, so there's no. It has to have estimated or potential yield for you to be able to tax that land. There's no tax. So there's no yield, so there's no possibility of that. So there's no kharaj. Now, if it's possible to clear all that up and within the year you're able to get a crop out of it, then there will be a kharaj, because kharaj will be every year. So if half of the year it got messed up, but then you were able to do something in there that grew, then they would have to pay kharaj. Now, we said above, he said that it has to be a natural calamity that is impossible to avoid. So it had to be a natural calamity that was impossible, like a major hurricane or floods or something, or storm or something like that. Because if it was man-made calamity and not, if it was something carelessness of some sort or something, accident or something that was possible to avoid. If you see a natural calamity, you can't avoid them. It just comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if it's something that was man-made, for example, monkeys came and finished everything over, the crows or wild animals came and destroyed everything, or livestock came and did that, then you should have looked after it. The kharaj will not drop in that case. And also they qualified that whole mas'ala that it was utterly and completely destroyed, right? That meant it's utterly destroyed from when they were still growing it, right? However, if they had grown it and harvested, and then their harvest after they'd taken it away, then that got destroyed through some fire or something, then it doesn't drop, because you already had your crop, and that's something, it's already become legislated. So it becomes only once it's grown in that sense, right? Now, what happens if you've got a kharaji land and the person just leaves it uncultivated? It can't bother, he doesn't do it himself, doesn't give it to anybody else to do either. مع إمكان زراعتها, while they have the potential to do so, فعليه الخراج. He still has to pay the kharaj. So that's going to force him to do the work. That's going to force him, because we want to use this. What's the point? You go to some countries, mashallah, everywhere you go, it's just thriving with the cultivation, like Spain. You drive around and it's just cultivation after cultivation. It's just everything is growing. And you go to some countries, huge amounts of land, nothing's being cultivated. Either because people poor, or there's no incentives, or whatever the case is. So this is لوجود التمكن, because he's got capability to do so. Right? هذا إذا كان الخراج موظفا. This is the case. So now there are two types of kharaj, by the way. I didn't mention them earlier. I didn't want to confuse anybody. Two types of kharaj. One is the kharaj, which is a fixed kharaj. They stipulated that for this it will be this much, for this it will be this much. Sometimes what the imam can do is he can do the second type of kharaj, which is kharaj muqasama, which means it's a share of the produce. It's whatever you get, it's going to be this percentage. So the one we've been speaking about right now is just regardless of how much it grows, unless it goes to unless it grows less than double, you have to pay a certain fixed amount. It's not based on a proportion or a percentage. However, the second type of kharaj is based on a share of the produce. So it's just a share. Whatever you produce, give me 5%. Or 10% or whatever it is. فإنه لا يجب عليه شيء كما في الجوهر عن الفرائض. So if the whole thing if it's the case where the guy didn't grow anything and the kharaj agreement or imposition there is on a share of it, then he doesn't have to pay anything because he didn't grow anything anyway. But if it was the normal situation of a fixed amount, regardless of how much they grow, he would have to pay even if he didn't grow anything. Okay, now what happens if there's a non-Muslim? He's been left on his land, so he becomes a dhimmi, and the place becomes a kharaj land. He then decides to become a Muslim. Does that change the land? So وَمَنْ أَسْلَمَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْخَرَاجِ أُخِذَ مِنْهُ الْخَرَاجِ عَلَى حَالِهِ. Whoever becomes a Muslim from the people of the kharaj, his kharaj will continue to be taken. Even as a Muslim, you'll still charge him kharaj. لأن الأرض قد اتصفت بالخراج, because this land has been classified officially as a kharaj land. فلا تتغير بتغير المالك. By the owner changing his designation, it doesn't want to change anymore. Remember, these designations and classifications come about based on how they were originally designated, and then they remain like that forever, essentially. ويجوز أن يشتري المسلم أرض الخراج من الذمي. It is permissible, for example, for a Muslim to purchase a kharaji land from a non-Muslim. اعتبار بسائر أملاكه. He can buy anything else of him, so why can't he buy his land? It doesn't have to forcefully remain with them. And then if the Muslim buys it, the kharaj will be taken from him. It's not going to become ushri just because he bought it now. Ushri is only at the time when it was originally designated that you can do that. And obviously when he's purchased it from non-Muslim, implicitly he has basically agreed to pay the kharaj, so he will pay the kharaj as well. We're going to inshallah now finish this section off on Ushr and Kharaj, and then since we've got some time left over and one more session, we're going to be covering another topic. So let's just finish this off. So in the Hidayah it mentions that وَقَدْ صَحَّ أَنَّ الصَّحَابَةَ رِضْوَانُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِمْ اشْتَرَوْا أَرَاضِي الْخَرَاجِ وَكَانُوا يَؤُدُّونَ خَرَاجَهَا فدل ذلك على جواز الشراء وأخذ الخراج وأدائه للمسلم من غير كراهة. The Hidayah clarifies that it's soundly reported that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum also purchased kharaj land, right, whether that was from non-Muslims or otherwise, and then they would then pay kharaj as opposed to ushr. They would pay the kharaj, and this indicates that it's permissible to buy such a land, and it's obviously to take kharaj from the people who own that, and then to pay it to Muslims without any kind of dislike. So it's completely fine. Right, the next section is the discussion regarding you can't have a hybrid land or a combined land where you have to pay kharaj and ushr as well. So وَلَا عُشْرَ فِي الْخَارِجِ مِنْ أَرْضِ الْخَرَاجِ. There's going to be no tithe, meaning tenth, for any produce that comes from a kharaji land. Because remember, the tithe, the ushr, is given from whatever's produced. It's always a percentage, the 10%. So since the kharaji land already has a taxation on the land itself, on the holding of that land and the potential of that land, there's going to be nothing to be paid from its produce, right? لأن الخراج يجب في أرض فتحت عنوة وقهرا والعشر في أرض أسلم أهلها طوعا والوصفان لا يجتمعان في أرض واحدة. Because the kharaj is obligatory in any land that was conquered by force and dominance, whereas ushr is any land whose owners became a Muslim without any force, through their own option. And these two characteristics are never combined or cannot coexist in one land. Legally speaking, they can't coexist in one piece of land. وَسَبَبُ الْحَقَّيْنِ وَاحِدٌ. And the same cause is for both obligations, right? So the cause is one ultimately, and it can't be obligated in two ways. وَهُوَ الْأَرْضُ النَّامِيَةِ. Because ultimately you only put ushr or kharaj on any land which has productivity. So it's based on the land's productivity. So once you've used the land's productivity to obligate kharaj, you can't then do ushr as well. And if you've done it for ushr, you can't do it for kharaj, because that would be unfair. إلا أنه يعتبر في العشر تحقيقا وفي الخراج تقديرا. Except that the way the land's productivity is dealt with is that when it comes to ushr, it's upon the actual cultivation. So remember, it's only if anything is produced from there and then a percentage is given. Just like zakat is, that you make money and then you give 2.5%. If you don't make any money, there's no zakat. Whereas in the kharaj, it's based on its estimated yield or its potential yield. So even if they're not producing anything in many cases, they still have to pay. And because it's always to do with the land then and what it produces and its productivity, that's why the ruling is always attributed to the land and not the person. So it doesn't matter whether he's Muslim or non-Muslim. Whether he's Muslim or non-Muslim was only the factor when that land was initially classified. But once it's been classified, it doesn't matter who owns it afterwards. It's a ushri or kharaji land. And the rest of that discussion can be found in Hidayah. So that was the last of that discussion. So alhamdulillah, I think that gives us a decent understanding. Not sure if we're ever going to deal with kharaj or ushri lands, but we understand how Islam, how the fiqh dealt with these things. So what I'm going to do now is, usually the next chapter after this is regarding ahkamu ahli dhimma and jizya. The details regarding jizya and the people of the dhimma, the people who pay the protection tax, who have to give that jizya. But that's rather a lengthy section, and we won't be able to complete it in the one lesson that we have left. And after that, it's a section on murtaddeen, apostates. Again, that's a bit too long as well for the one lesson that we have left. So I'm going to, for now, just cover the last of the related aspects of this section of the book, and that is Kitabul Bughat. Kitabul Bughat. This is a discussion regarding rebels. So again, this is all to do with leadership, and it's to do with dealing with rebellions in this case. So we've been dealing with Ahlul Harb, meaning the people that the Muslims may be at war with, and we dealt with all of that. We missed out the section on dealing with their non-Muslim citizens. We also missed out the section on anybody who becomes an apostate. Hopefully we'll do that later, inshallah. However, now we deal with rebels within the Muslim lands. How does the Muslim leader and the government, Muslim government, deal with the rebels? So this is called Kitabul Bughat. And in Islamic jurisprudence, I'll just give you a little introduction. In Islamic jurisprudence, Bughat, which is the plural of Baghi, right, refers to a group of Muslims who rebel against a legitimate and just ruler, Imam al-Haq, as we refer to them, without valid justification. This rebellion involves organized resistance and disobedience to the ruler's authority. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discusses this in the Quran. There's many hadith about it. So Bughat will be dealing with that in terms of how Quduri dealt with, and Imam Quduri with Imam Maydani's commentary starts at page 327 in this volume 5. So he says, وَلَمَّا أَنْهَى الْكَلَامَ عَلَى أَحْكَامِ الْمُرْتَدِّينَ خَذَ فِي الْكَلَامِ عَلى أَحْكَامِ الْبُغَاة. When he's completed the discussion on the rulings regarding the apostates, he starts to discuss the rulings related to the rebels. Now we'll explain what rebel is. وَالْبُغَاةُ جَمْعُ بَاغٍ مَنْ بَغَى عَلى النَّاسِ ظَلَمَ وَاعْتَدَى. So literally, بَغَى يَبْغِي, it usually refers to بَغَى عَلى النَّاسِ. It usually refers to those who oppress people, those who wrong people, those who act with some kind of tyranny against people. However, in terms of the technical meaning that we are applying here and that we need here, في عرف الفقهاء, as they says, الخارج عن طاعة الإمام الحق بغير حق. It's essentially those who rebel against the rightful imam, meaning they come out of his obedience. They no longer want to obey him, and they do this without a valid reason. كما في التنوير. Now, they don't discuss in these books what valid reasons could be. I don't think they've dealt with it here. However, they deal with that in the more lengthier books. So he says, وَإِذَا تَغَلَّبَ قَوْمٌ مِّنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ عَلَى بَلَدٍ. If there's a group of people that somehow take control over a part of the land, if there are some Muslims who take control of a piece of land against the Imam, basically, rebels who take. So he said that he's specifically spoken about Muslims, because if this was the people of Dhimma, the non-Muslim residents, if they dominated, if they overcame a certain area to fight with the Imam and to not obey him anymore, they would actually become Ahlul Harb. They would become enemies of war, just like the Ahlul Harb from another area, because that's what they've initiated there. That means that they've rebelled against the obedience of the Imam. So they're going to be dealt with in a completely different way to the way the Muslim rebels are. So there is a major difference between the way Muslim rebels are dealt with and the way non-Muslims are dealt with, whether that's an inside rebellion or a rebellion, or not a rebellion, but an actual war with non-Muslims outside. Now, there's just a separate point that Imam Maidani brings here, is that how does an Imam become an Imam in the first place? Meaning, how is a leader chosen? This isn't any exhaustive study, but he say in the Khaniya, it mentions in his Kitab al-Sir that our ulama said Sultan becomes a Sultan through two things. One is by people pledging to him, and in terms of the pledge, it's not the common folk that they're worried about. They don't get the common folk to necessarily all of them, because that would be huge for them to come and take the pledge. Thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people. It's the notables of the area and the prominent figures of the community. They're the ones who have to do that. And the second thing is that once they've taken the pledge, he has to be able to implement his laws in the subjects, meaning in the community, and they should listen to that, and his law should be implementable based on the fact that they are scared of his power and his authority, which means that he has to have power and authority to do this. Otherwise, it's going to be an issue. It's not going to work. So then he says that if people do give him the pledge of allegiance, but he cannot enforce his rule among them, there's just chaos everywhere, and there's just too many other strong people, or there's just too many other gangs or other things that are not obeying the law, لِعِجْزِهِ عَنْ قَهْرِهِمْ لَا يَسِيرُ سُلْطَانًا, because of his inability to overwhelm them and control them, then he's not the legitimate, or he does not become a legitimate leader. He doesn't become a legitimate ruler. No, so he won't be. They'll have to find somebody else to do that, right? Again, it is not very exhaustive discussion here. If he does take the pledge and becomes a ruler, and he does have this ability to control people, but fajara, he becomes unjust and he treats them unjustly. Well, let's start again. If he is given the pledge and then he becomes abusive, he becomes unjust. Now, due to the injustice this is actually showing you one way to depose a leader, essentially, that if he becomes unjust, now there's two things to look at. If he has dominance, if he has might and dominance to control people, then he's not removed from his position. He can't be removed from his position, because there's a practical scenario here, right? He's wrong in what he's doing, and Allah will take care of him, but people can't remove him. لا ينعزل. He doesn't become removed. لأنه لو انعزل يصير سلطانا بالقهر والغلبة. Because technically, if he was to be removed, or if they gave a fatwa for him to be removed, nobody's strong enough to actually physically remove him, because he's got the might, he's got the strength. So Imam Maidani is clarifying that if he was to be removed from his position, he would just become the sultan with his own might and dominance. فَلَا يُفِيد. So there's no point in removing him. وَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ قَهْرٌ وَغَلَبَةٌ يَنْعَزِلُ. Of course, if he doesn't have the capability to control people, he doesn't have any power of his own, then yes, he will be fired. He will be removed from his position, and they'll find somebody else. So to conclude this session, we dealt with the last several issues related to our previous chapter that we were discussing, which was the ushr and the kharaj, and we dealt with the last few issues there about how do they pay, what do they pay, and what were the different amounts that were supposed to be paid. We dealt with Umar radiallahu anhu, what he legislated in the Ushri lands, in the Kharaji lands, speaking about the Jaribs, which means the 60 by 60 cubits, how much people have to pay based on that. There are 3 different types of payments. One for those crops that didn't really require much effort, right? So it was the highest tax, which was 10 dirhams. Then there was the medium one, and then there was the one which required a lot of effort, and you have to put a lot of effort behind it. And for that one, it was a sa' and a dirham, which was the lowest tax. And then he said that anything that he did not legislate on, all the other things, then the Imam has a right to legislate, or rather impose a tax that is appropriate for that. But then there's some guidelines in that regard, that the tax can never be more than double, cannot be more than half of whatever produce there is. So if he imposed something and then the produce is less than double of it, they would have to reduce it, right? So the Imam has to do that. And then we also discussed the issues that if there is a major calamity or something, and if all that land of Kharaj became destroyed, meaning all the crops rather, all the produce, the cultivation in there became destroyed either to a flood or a fire or something, Afa Samawiya usually, something to do with a natural disaster that was unavoidable, then they don't have to pay anymore. Unless, of course, within that year it produces another crop, then it means that they've benefited from their land, so they'll have to pay. And likewise, if it was a man-made issue that could have been avoided, like there was, it happened due to wild animals or monkeys or anything like that, then they would still have to pay. It also mentions that if somebody leaves a land uncultivated, right, which is already designated as a kharaji land, they will still have to pay, because why aren't they using it? So it forces people to actually use their land. And then after that, any non-Muslim who was on a kharaji land becomes a Muslim, you'll still charge them the kharaj. And it's allowed for Muslims to buy kharaji lands, but they will still stay kharaji lands. They don't become ushri lands afterwards. They don't change their classification status. And then the final thing was that there's no you can't impose double taxation. There's no concept of double taxation, so you can't put a kharaj and an ushr on a land. And then after that we started the chapter of the bughat, the rebels, and we spoke about what a rebel is, somebody who goes out against the legitimate imam. And then we were discussing how a person becomes a sultan, a true leader, and that was by having enough imposition and law and being able to control the situation. And if a person can't control a situation, then they lose their position, their leadership. And then also discussion was that if there is a leader that was people pledged allegiance to, and the people who pledge allegiance need to be the notables and the prominent figures of the community, not just the general population. It has to be the movers and shakers of the area, the prominent individuals. And if he does do that, if they pledge allegiance to somebody, and that person then becomes unjust, starts oppressing people, then if he has dominance rather, and force, and people can't stand up to him anyway, then there's no point trying to fire him, because he is not going to be fired. He's just going to use his capability and his power to take over again. So it's not benefit. But however, if that's not the case and he doesn't have that power, then yes, he will be fired from that job. So inshallah, we'll cover the rest of it in the rest of that chapter, hopefully inshallah in the next lesson. Inshallah, we'll see you there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.